This is BTV World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali and you are watching Fault Lines. We are going to discuss the developments on the front of Ukrainian war, where Russian forces are making some remarkable developments. Amid all the support that Ukraine had from the NATO allies, the West has now started thinking that perhaps it's the lack of economic support that has thwarted Ukraine's way to proceed further. In a great development, the United States has decided to reroute the Russian assets that has been frozen by the United States to the support of Ukrainian military. But is it going to be the panacea that is going to solve the problems? Because apparently Russia is making serious developments. And to talk about this very pertinent development, my first guest is joining me from Moscow. He's Leonid Savin, Chief Editor, Geopolika.ru, also Senior Analyst at Sargrad Institute, which is a think tank based in Moscow. Leonid Savin, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Syed.
Leonid, is Russia aiming to close this war because all the calculations that had been made by the West are apparently going in a wrong direction?
Yes, we have some success in recent days and recent weeks, and I think we will develop the situation on the front line, both and in our economical situation inside Russia, because we see the rise of economics. At least we see no problem with manpower on front line, and we see no problem with our allies like China, like Iran, and like other countries that support Russian activity in general. So we see with optimism on the current situation on Ukrainian front.
How can the United States freeze the Russian assets, and how can the United States reroute these assets toward financing of Ukrainian war? Perhaps this is something that cannot be termed as a very legal development.
Actually, Mr. Putin, our president, recently signed a new decree that means confiscation of American assets inside of Russia, in back of confiscation of Russian assets of United States. So it's a very serious step. It's a message to United States, and not only, also a message to European countries, because most of stolen Russian assets are located in Euroclear, in Belgium. So it's a very clear sign that next step will be confiscation of European assets inside of Russia. Not matter what country will be kind of victim, Poland or France or Germany, because it's a collective responsibility of European Union. So let's see what happens. Actually, inside of Russia, we have much more American assets than Russian assets inside of United States. So in this situation, finally we will win in this confrontation with the United States. So I think that European politicians will think twice before they will do the similar decision like United States.
Putin's win in the election perhaps assures the consistency of policies. Perhaps this would also be a great support for the Russian military that is fighting on the front. Perhaps it ensures them the consistency of policy by the Russian capital.
Actually, we have a consolidated position inside of Russia. All political elites and after elections, re-elections of Vladimir Putin in Russia and the new government, and actually inside Russia no problem. But we also need to think about elections in other countries. For example, legitimacy of Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine already finished. So there is discussion, is his position legal or not in Ukraine. Actually, everything happened before elections in European Union. And many political parties who think is the more constructive and more adequate way now gain more support from European citizens. And it will be very good and for Russia and very bad for Ukraine if new political powers will come after European Parliament elections.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leonid Savin, for being a guest in our show. Ladies and gentlemen, after taking the take from Moscow, let's quickly proceed to the Washington, D.C., where my guest is Eugene, Savsky. He's Senior Director, Newsline Institute. Eugene, I welcome you to the show. What is happening on the war front at the moment when Russia and Ukraine both are fighting this war for such a long time?
Hi, Shabahat. Thank you for having me on the program. So as far as the latest on the war front for the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we've seen how Russia has basically been continuing some of its offensives in eastern Ukraine, particularly in the Kharkiv region. And now Ukrainian forces are starting to recover some of that lost ground and slowing the advance, although that we do see fighting continuing, especially in the town of Vovchansk. We also saw how Russian forces have taken some villages in Donetsk and Luhansk, while Ukraine is continuing to conduct missile and drone strikes, especially in Russia's border region of Belgorod. It's also notable that this past week we saw Russia announce tactical nuclear weapons exercises close to the Ukrainian border, which I think was intended to send a message not only to Ukraine but also to its Western backers. And so essentially we've seen the continuation of fighting on the war front, but certainly a slow in Russia's advances in Kharkiv and in other parts of eastern Ukraine.
So tell me, Eugene, what do you think of this Western aid for Ukraine, which has increasingly become a point of concern and a point of debate in the Western circles now?
As far as Western aid to Ukraine is concerned, so clearly the big aid package that the U.S. had approved last month, the $60 billion in aid, as Ukraine was seeing some losses of territory and really kind of on its back foot. We're now starting to see the effects of that. You know, some of that aid, it takes some time for it to get delivered, especially the parts that are, coming from the U.S. itself. Other weapons packages were able to be transferred in a more quick fashion from European countries. But we're starting to see essentially Ukraine be able to, as I mentioned before, at least slow down the Russian advances. One major issue that has been kind of the subject of discussion is whether Ukraine can use some of that U.S. aid, the weapons packages, to attack in Russia proper. This is something that the Ukrainians have argued would be really necessary, especially in that Kharkiv vector. We see that Russia is able to conduct, missile attacks, drone attacks from Russian territory on Kharkiv, given that it's so close to the border. So this is something that the U.S. is still very hesitant for fear of getting dragged further into the conflict and, perhaps having a Russian escalation. But that aid is going into Ukraine. We're now starting to see the effects of it. And Ukraine is essentially hoping to not only stop that Russian advance, but hopefully stem the tide against Russia in the coming months.
Eugene, what do you make of the outlook of this conflict? Because there are contradicting reports in the international media regarding the outlook of this conflict. Do you think it's going to be decided soon?
As for the outlook for the conflict and the possibility of an outcome, I think that it was quite notable actually just yesterday that according to Russian sources, Russian President Vladimir Putin is reportedly ready to halt the war with a negotiated ceasefire that recognizes the current battlefield lines. So we've seen that Russia's forces remain relatively strong vis-a-vis Ukrainian forces. We've seen the gains that Russia has made, albeit limited, in areas like Kharkiv and also Donetsk and Luhansk. And essentially, Russia is trying to, or at least signaling, that it's ready to have this ceasefire. Now, this is something that Ukraine is clearly against. Their goal remains to liberate the territory that they lost to the Russians. They still have the support from the U.S. and from the West to do that. But eventually there will be some kind of negotiated settlement. So the question is, when and under what terms. I know that there's going to be a peace conference, hosted in Switzerland, which will basically be supported by Ukraine and some of its partners, while Russia is undergoing its own mediation efforts with countries like China. So it seems like the two sides are still negotiating on the battlefield, so to speak. but we are moving, I think, inching closer towards some kind of diplomatic settlement. And what that is, I think, will be more clear in the coming months.
Thank you very much, Eugene Chavsovsky, for being guest in our show. Ladies and gentlemen, now in Islamabad, I have a guest in the studio. His name is Wajih Abbasi. He's an expert in IR and is going to enlighten us more about this conflict. Wajih Sahab, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you much.
Tell me first of all about this economic aspect of this war, in which the United States has now decided to route the frozen assets of Russia towards the funding of Ukrainian war.
One thing is that, Ukraine is a smaller country as compared to Russia, and since the start of the conflict in 2022, the Russians have been striking the Ukrainian economy in a very hard way. So most of their economy was initially, it took a very heavy toll. They recovered in 2023. Somewhat, but still they have a lot of problems. They whatever they collect from taxes in the country, they have to spend on the war. So they don't have any cash to even to pay pensions or even to run the medical supplies and that sort of things. That's one issue. Then second issue is, of course, the financing the war. And you remember recently the United States passed a bill under which $60 billion were to be given to the Ukraine for its military support. But that still is not enough. And the US has been pushing the European allies to spend more on aid to Ukraine. But the European allies and even Japan, they have their own problems. So they have been discussing this issue of the use of Russian frozen assets. As you know, there are something like 350 billion US dollars of the Russian assets in the European Union and the United States. Most of them of the European Union, which were frozen at the start of the war. Now they are thinking of using those money, and recently, they have decided to use interest rates on those interest rate accumulated on those funds to be given to Ukraine in support of their war efforts. Ukrainians, of course, are pushing for more. I mean, to be given all of those funds to Ukraine. But of course, in the European Union and the United States, there are certain sort of objections by different people on outright transfer of the whole fund.
But Abbasi Sahab, you think there is a difference within Europe and the United States as well, because Europe has for a very long time stayed dependent on the sources of energy, gas coming from Russia, and many other trade relationships.
Yeah, there are some problems, of course, in like there were in Germany, which was more dependent on the Russian gas than probably other countries. And other European countries also have this sort of issue. And then, you go to these funds only, and like, for example, if the Europeans today freeze those funds and transfer them to Ukraine, then which country is going to park its money in the European Union in future? Because if they are going to use it, there will have long-term consequences, and that's probably the most important thing, which is beholding the European Union to freeze those funds, and that's the issue in the United States also.
You very aptly pointed out, because doing such things, particularly at a time when BRICS is also planning to come up with an alternative model of financing, would have its own consequences. But tell me how Europe then plans to finance Ukraine, because if it's Ukraine's needs are not met in time, it's going to be a catastrophe. You might have the entire of Ukraine falling into the clutches of Russia.
Frankly speaking, it's very difficult. I mean, Europeans might not admit it openly, but it's difficult. Because, the United States has just given them sanctions, actually, not given them right now, but sanctions $60 billion. And the European Union is also something like $18–20 billion coming from European Union. Germany is the important contributor, but UK and France and other countries are also paying. But the Ukrainian needs are a lot more than that. As I told you, that they need to run the economy, and they have to finance the war also. And then war is very expensive. In 2022, if you remember, and we all remember probably, there was a a lot of talk about the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And the United States and the Europeans, they were building up the Ukrainian troops for a counter-offensive which had to start in early summer last year, and which had to was aimed to push back the Russian forces. That counter-offensive failed, and after that the Russians got the initiative. They took back some of the areas from in the eastern Ukraine, southeast Ukraine. Then now they are pushing in Kharkiv region. Though Putin said that he is not going to occupy Kharkiv, but they are pushing back. That will stretch the Ukrainian forces, which were concentrating on south and east of the country. Now they have to put their their resources are already very short, and now they have to put those resources in the north also. So the Russians are expanding the war. The recent report says the Ukrainians even recently don't have much vehicles to transport people to the war front. They have just last week probably they have lowered the conscription age from 27 to 25 years, and they are not finding enough recruits for that. They don't have enough shells. I mean, in 2022 they have overused their artillery. There were some of the reports were saying that when they were needed just one shell to fire, they were firing 10 shells. But now it's the reverse.
It's the other way around. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much, Wajih Abbasi Saab, for enlightening us on this. Ladies and gentlemen, we will take a break and we'll join you back with second segment of the program. Stay with us. In a tragic turn of events, the former president of Iran, Ebrahim Raisi, met a very unfortunate end and a very untimely departure. The president, who became a pride for his nation, who stood very tall with his nation amid various geopolitical and domestic challenges, had been given a farewell bid by Ayatollah Khamenei and many other mourners from Iran. How this is going to translate into political and geopolitical challenges that Iran is going to face, because Ebrahim Raisi came to the power at a very turning and defining moment of Iran's contemporary history. To talk about this very pertinent subject, Dr. Ahmad Zaki, an expert of Middle East, is joining me from Somaliland on Skype. Dr. Ahmad Zaki, I welcome you to my show. Dr. Ahmad Zaki, do I have you on?
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Ahmad Zaki, first things first. So tell me about Raisi's rise to power amid the circumstances that Iran was facing recently.
As you know that Raisi, he came to the power when Iran was facing a lot of crisis from a diplomatic relations with Western world, where the Hassan Rouhani tried to balance between the left and right of Iran, who were blaming him that he's too soft to deal with the Western countries. And when Rouhani came, he came at the time where when Raisi came, he came when Iran was facing already economic badness, and they were feeling too much isolated in the region. There was a dispute between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and there was a lot of sanctions that Iran was not even able to sell their oil easily even to their own allies. Now, when he left the country, like when his time of departure came, at the accident time. Iran was a member of the BRICS countries, where was the first largest bloc after the G7. Now they cross even the G7. He make Iran member of that at the beginning of this year. And he successfully completed the difference between Saudi Arabia and Iran through the Chinese negotiations. And that make him
that would have been my... Zaki, I'm sorry to cut you here, but this would have been my next question, because Iran is a country that strategically is known to have an iron fist when it comes to its strategic policies. And despite this iron fist stance being maintained, former President Ibrahim Raisi mended a lot of relationship with international counterparts. He tried to mend relationship with Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He did a lot of networking with Russia and China as well. So how do you see his connectivity to the regional players?
It's not only he did not only make good relations with Russia and China, but one of the greatest allies of US, India. He made very good relations with them, where India now is able to purchase oil directly from Iran. And this is one of the extremely successful diplomatic mission for the Raisi. And that shows that Iran is now coming out from the Western sanctions under the leadership of Raisi before he passed away.
Also tell us about his mending of relationship with the neighboring Azerbaijan, a country with which Iran always have, bit of problems. But Raisi's visit to Azerbaijan was quite discussed in the international media. And also when there was a sad event taking place between Iran and Pakistan, he all the way came to Pakistan and addressed many of Pakistan's leaders to mend the relationship.
And he was trying to spread his influence in the region positively in his diplomatic visit with Pakistan, particularly after the clash of Pakistan and Iran in early March. So this is one of the successful missions that he accomplished before his soul departure. On the other hand, Azerbaijan is one of the Western close allies, which they feel that if they make that much big deal with Iran, the Iran sanction will be compromised. And Westerns were looking that one by one their allies are going to close to Iran. Look, Pakistan is one of the closest allies of USA in the region, and still they were ready to make a business deal with Iran. And on the other hand, India already did, China, Russia, now Azerbaijan. So what's the use of the sanctions of Western if it's not working even through their own allies? That is one of the failure of the Western sanctions on Iran, shows that Iran is going through progress if they still maintain their policy of against the Western hegemony.
Zaki, the continuity of Raisi's inheritance, his political inheritance, his legacy, his political vision, do you think this is going to be an easy task for whoever comes to replace him?
I don't think it will be an easy task. And Raisi was not only a politician; he was Islamic leader, influential, one of the Islamic leaders. There was a lot of speculation is that he will be the next Ayatollah of Iran if he continued the same way. He was having influence in terms of the Islamic clerics in Iran, and he was having influence in the community of Iran, specifically in the economic community of Iran, a businessman and politician. So he was a multidimensional politician where he have effect on both economy, politics, and religion. So when his position will not be able to fulfill by one person, it will need to fulfill by a couple of people that can continue the policy. On the policy, major policy of Iran, specifically the foreign policy of Iran, is being influenced by the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and his top Islamic clerics who navigate the foreign policy of Iran. It will not be changed in any sense. It will have like some sort of relaxation if someone came from the middle class society of Iran who have kind of a moderate kind of a leader. But I don't think in this particular period of time where the Americans are fully support with the genocide of Gaza, it will not be easy that any politician who is close to Western will have access even to come to near to the election in Iran.
While we continue this conversation from platform of Pakistan television, we offer our heartfelt condolences to the entire Iranian nation on this very tragic incident. We are now moving with Ahmad Zaki to the last segment of our program, which is about the ICJ's ruling for an immediate halt of attack on Rafah. As all of us know that South Africa had reached the International Court of Justice not only to ask Israel to trial Israel's President Netanyahu for his war crimes in the area of Gaza, but also about the ground invasion recently made in Rafah, which has caused many other problems, as it has stopped the only possibility of any humanitarian assistance coming into the strip of Gaza. Ahmad Zaki, how do you, as an expert of Middle East, look into this development? Because for the first time on an international forum, we have such a remarkable judgment, which perhaps is a validation of the stance adopted by all those who have stood against Israel. Zaki.
And definitely now Israel was having some sort of a moral ground in Western democracy. They were showing that they are the only democratic nation in the Middle East who are respecting the international law and international rules and regulations. But now when they ignore this ruling, it will show that the power of Israel have been used against the humanity and against the innocent civilian in Gaza. That shows that they are going to lose their major allies in West. Not only America, even American polls are showing that anyone who supports Israel is complicit with the genocide in Gaza. And that shows the shift of the opinion in Western world, and now Palestine is getting a lot of support. Now we know that the Knesset of Israel will reject automatically the ruling of the ICJ, and they will also criticize, as we know they have already did that earlier. They are saying it's a shame for international law that Israel is going to be like order to not defend themselves as they claim, but evidence have shown that they are doing the ethnic cleansing in Gaza. And it's now the first time that the pro-Western country is going to be convicted in the court of justice in the world. And this is not like ICC, which orders the Netanyahu war crime, but this is part of the UN organism. And it's the highest agency of international law. So if they ignore, it shows that the international law will not be like equal for everyone.
Thank you very much for being guest in our show, Ahmad Zaki. Your point is well taken. Ladies and gentlemen, since this ruling is a legal matter of legal nature, we have invited Ms. Ayesha Malik, who is an international lawyer and is going to help us understand the dynamics of this judgment. Ms. Ayesha Malik, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much.
Help us to comprehend this judgment, because we normally do not expect international bodies to give judgment against the state of Israel. It has stood so far above every law, every ethic, everything that wherever they could be held accountable, they have not been held accountable. So tell us about the background of having this judgment.
So we're really seeing international legal institutions right now step up in holding these states accountable. And we have seen South Africa, and much credit goes to them, and huge, congratulations and commendations go to their legal team for pursuing this case against Israel on the basis of violations under its obligations under the Genocide Convention. Now, South Africa had gone to the court now 4 times asking for a ceasefire, and we have finally got a ceasefire, albeit a very geographically restricted one. So now the court has said that they have to halt their military offensive on Rafah. And the word offensive here is quite important because it takes into account the fact that Israel is claiming the right to self-defense. So you can still use defensive force against Hamas in Rafah, but you cannot continue with your military offensive in Rafah. And you also have to open the Rafah crossing, and you also have to allow in UN commissions of inquiry and UN fact-finding missions which can investigate allegations of genocide. So this is quite major from the court. It did not allow this in January. It did not give an order for a ceasefire, even a geographically limited one. But now we see that South Africa has gone back to the court 4 times, and finally now the court has said yes, they have to halt fire in Rafah.
Ayesha, help us to understand the legal mechanism or the jurisdiction of this international court. Is it a court which judgments are to be implemented no matter what? Is there any international police that ensures that these judgments, or is it merely the will of the countries to look into these judgments and adopt if they may wish to, or otherwise they may walk away without any consequences?
So as with other international legal mechanisms, we don't have enforcement mechanisms, right? There is no UN army, there is no UN police force which can enforce this order. What we do rely on is states themselves to do so. And if they don't do so, then the Security Council can step in. We also had a ceasefire order when it came to Russia and Ukraine. Many other states said that Russia should abide by that order. They did not. Because Russia is a permanent 5 member of the Security Council, they also could not have a resolution from that organ. But what we can see here is that the U.S. is likely to veto one if a resolution does come to the Security Council, but we can have that go to the General Assembly. And I'm looking now to the General Assembly in hopes that it will try and order that Israel comply with this order.
And how do you look into the response given by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has actually termed this to be a bad decision and has said that blaming him for it is like blaming United States President, former President, for 9/11?
I mean, we are now 20 years on from 9/11. So the 9/11 and the war on terror has been catastrophic for a number of countries. Let's look at Afghanistan. Let's look at Iraq. So it's not I don't know who he's speaking to when he refers to 9/11, but I don't think it's playing well with really any of the corners of the world. But this is the prime minister now who has arrest warrants potentially against him from the International Criminal Court. We saw the prosecutor earlier this week file an application for arrest warrants against him on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. So this, in terms of how he has reacted to that and how he has reacted to this, it's been in a very, very bullish tone. And I think that even the U.S. are now going to face many issues if they continue to stand with Israel, stand with what looks to be an indolent child, throwing tantrums about not being allowed to do an offensive on Rafah.
And going forward, how do you think Israel is going to respond to it? Are they just going to, put a deaf ear to it? Or do you think they are going to file another case and say, we weren't heard, our point of view has not been heard, or as we file, a petition against another petition? Is there such a mechanism in place in the International Court of Justice?
So we've already had the order violated, right? So overnight, they did again launch offensive operations in Rafah. Scores of people have already died overnight. So the order has already been breached. In terms of Israel going to the court, that is unlikely. What we might see is this playing out now in the General Assembly, and we'll see how South Africa then takes this case from there. We are going to have the case go on to the merits. And because Israel has actually been showing up so far, I'm hoping that it also does show up at the merits and argue that whatever it's doing in Gaza is not genocidal. But it really depends on South Africa and if they want to take it back to the court. The court has at this point given a geographically limited ceasefire, and if a state is not abiding by that, it does fall to other organs of the UN to try and force it to, but mainly it also falls to the international community. So what you have now is a legal piece of paper which is saying that Israel is violating its obligations, and it's about the international community and how they force Israel to comply and how they isolate it to show that it can't then stand with its allies, which are protecting it so far.
So in that case, what do you think the response of United States and EU is going to be? Because actually it is these international bodies that have always been supporting the International Court of Justice.
Yes, and the ICC. It's been very interesting to see Germany's response in particular. Germany has also been dragged to the ICJ by Nicaragua for supporting Israel's war in Gaza. But also it said that it would comply with arrest warrants. It said if Netanyahu ends up in Munich, ends up in Berlin, we are going to comply with the arrest warrants, we will arrest him. So that was a very positive step. In terms of Biden and Netanyahu's relationship, I think it's very, very clear now that Biden is, seeing how unpopular Netanyahu is trying to distance himself, but also does not know what to do with this ally. And so really, he will be looking to this ICJ order and saying, we need to force Israel in some way to comply. It is the U.S. which has always said, do not go into Rafah. And they have tried to warn Israel. Israel, again, is not listening. It is funny at this point. It's not clear which is the client state of which. I can't decide whether the U.S. is the client state of Israel or whether it's the other way around. But really, he faces the toughest position now because we know that Netanyahu is probably not going to comply, already hasn't complied, probably won't allow commissions of inquiry in. So then what does Biden do with that?
Thank you very much, Ayesha Malik,
especially in an
for being
election
guest.
year.
Thank you very much, Ayesha Malik, for being guest in the show.
Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was the last guest in our program. And remember that the atrocities, the genocide, the barbarism, the ethnic cleansing in Gaza continues while we are just watching. But the voices in support of Gaza are increasing with each passing day. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.